Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Quick reminder, support the transmission, and the best way you can do that is by becoming a paid subscriber on the Substack. Every week or two, we do a group Zoom call with supporters only to shoot the breeze on global events. I also do a weekly commentary that's available to subscribers only, and on occasion, we bring back past podcast guests to do a live Q&A. You can donate through the website, buy me a coffee, donor box, all that sort of stuff. Purchase a consult if you want to chat with me about whatever you like, and do check out all of my affiliates and leave a podcast review if you haven't already. Share Geopolitics and Empire anywhere you can on the socials. Joining us for the first time is Ricoh Danielson. He's a distinguished national security advisor, globally recognized cybersecurity expert, and U.S. Army combat veteran with 9 rotations in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's the founder of Fortitude Tech LLC and first responder, where he specializes in digital forensics, incident response, and mitigating complex cyber threats. His extensive experience in operational security and global defense strategy makes him a sought-after voice in the fields of national security and cyber security. He's regularly featured on platforms like News Nation and NTD News, where he provides expert analysis on topics including global conflicts, ransomware defense, and geopolitical dynamics. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, Ricoh.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. And, this is a topic I haven't broached too often on the podcast, cybersecurity and all that. But before getting your thoughts on that, anything you want to add about your background and the work that you're currently doing?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of good work, not only helping out private organizations, private entities, but also governments as well, doing a lot of ransomware negotiation and a lot of pre-work for cybersecurity. So it was a fun year. Now it's going to be a really good year this year.
I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. But, okay. So, cybersecurity, as your bio explains, digital forensics, incident response, mitigating complex cyber threats. I sort of break it off into 3 vectors: citizens and individuals, us, businesses, corporations, and then nations. And if you could just, maybe to kick it off, give us paint a picture perhaps of what are some of the big threats when it comes to cybersecurity.
Yeah, if we look at those 3 pillars like you just had, right? So we have, individuals, the biggest cyber threats that happen to people, and especially from the Arizona-Mexico border and whatnot. And we have a lot of influence with the cartels recently is there's a lot of data centers, kind of the same thing in India. We'll see these farms, if you will, that are doing free, free identity, which is like they're trying to just capture people's identity, take their deeds, take their trust accounts, anything that's archaic in nature, they're going to go ahead and try to capture. Then they're going to run their scams. So from a personal perspective, my biggest thing is understanding my digital footprint and also how I can kind of control that. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of baby boomers that are about to hit retirement, and some of them don't have the technical skill set to know what a cyber scam kind of looks like. So they're falling prey to these things. So identity is a big one, credit card scams, and then also the IRS scams are pretty big. So it's all money focused, right? When we talk about organizations, those you'll start seeing different type of threat actors, not necessarily scamming, a little bit of scamming, like more invoicing scam, the big ticket dollar items, but more so you'll see like nation state, like, hey, we want to take down a fuel company, a power grid, a mail service, think critical infrastructure. That's what they go for. It depends on who you deal with. Like here in Rutherford County and Robertson County in Tennessee, they actually, an elementary school got hit by a cyber threat actor. And so it depends on what cream of the crop you get from a threat actor. It depends on what they're going to do. But pretty much its commonality is the infrastructure. That's the idea, to disrupt infrastructure. Now, from the government perspective, we have cyber warfare going on at any given time. A lot of people don't realize that there are other governments trying to take down other governments. Even the United States tries to take down other governments as well. But just nobody publicizes that. But you'll see anywhere from the Islamic Brotherhood to the CCP to North Korea, Ukraine, and also Russia. These are the top actors that actually try to actively take down critical items such as Department of Treasury, VA, motors, anything like that of the United States. So if we break those three areas down, that's how we kind of see those threat actors panning out.
And maybe continuing along with the citizens, individual focus. You mentioned something that was interesting, going after deeds or property. I'm a citizen of a number of countries, and I know people who in Croatia almost had their homes usurped through a corrupt mafia that operated, through the police, through lawyers, local government agencies, and luckily those folks were able to stop that attempt at, transferring the title of a home that they owned. And I saw in one of your previous podcast interviews, you mentioned Guadalajara, where I am, and I'm just curious on how do these, cyber threat actors, how are they able to sort of pull a title out from someone? Or I think you also mentioned pensions, Social Security, and things like that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of open source data, right? There's a lot of dark web data and whatnot. And remember, because of the OPM breach and other breaches within the municipalities, everyone's data is pretty much for sale. So once a person, let's just take a person goes from the United States to Guadalajara for a vacation or whatever, or established residence, at that point they're game on, right? Their credit cards, RFIDs being frequency out, their cell phones being frequency out. So it's not too hard to capture people's data and start manipulating that with regards to your identity, right? And then at that point, they start actually capturing different informations and putting out there and assuming the identity of this person. Now with deepfake here and artificial intelligence, it is not too hard to see and to administrate an act to assume somebody's identity. And so when they go back to the United States, Ricoh Danielson, has a house in some small little town. It's not too hard to recon the town, the assessors, assume the identity, flood it with inundation of forms like, hey, I want you to transfer this, this, and this. The little old municipality is so archaic that they'll just start approving stuff, and then all of a sudden my house is gone, right? So that's kind of the scams that we see.
What about thoughts on crypto scams? Those seem to be pretty hot right now, and I know I think I've known folks personally, a few that have succumbed to it.
Yep. So crypto scams are pretty nifty. A dear friend of mine actually fell to it, lost about $2,000. I have another friend who lost $200,000 in it, and his wife, chewed him up pretty good on that one. And so what happened on that one was they use legitimate sites like BitLock, Bitcoin, BitWallet, whatever. And what they'll do is they'll compromise that wallet, or they'll spoof it, redirect it, and all of a sudden your money was there and it's gone now. And so it's just the simple things of understanding the wallet you're about to invest in, the type of cryptocurrency you're about to invest in. The one thing I will tell people is there is no overnight success in crypto. Crypto is very much like mining your cash, right? So when people are like, hey, I want to go get rich, that's cool, but just be very, very careful on that.
And I'm curious, robocalls and scam calls, that's a big part of this as well. And I've sort of noticed over the past few years, I used to get, even here in Mexico, endless robocalls, scam calls. I'd have people calling me up, selling me credit cards, and I'd hear noise in the background that wasn't very professional. And I knew that they were scammers, trying to get my information, and I just start barking at them in Croatian or the little Russian that I know, and just to mess with them. But it seems like that has died down a bit because phones seem to have gotten better at detecting spam calls and nipping them in the bud. Is that a trend that's been going on, and are criminals moving on to other strategies, or are robocalls and scam calls still going strong?
Yeah, so robocalls and scam calls are going very strong. So it's just the ebb and flow of it, right? So you're going to see a rise in it. The ebb and flow is going to get shot down. All these farms are going to get shut down and whatnot. But when you really, really think about it, these threat actors are now have the artificial intelligence to adapt to, and also generative AI. And they also have to adapt around different applications that are known to block these robocalls. So now if you give it 6 months, there is going to be a technologist somewhere out there that's going to circumvent these things, and then robocall will be back, and then it's going to go into seasons again. Generally speaking, in the summer seasons, when it's hot in these specific areas like Romania, and then also in India and whatnot, in South America, is when people go inside. Same thing with Russia, right? Like when it's super cold, that's when threat actors really get good because there's nothing else to do. It's too cold to go outside. So same premise applies.
And again, just focusing on individuals, the weakest links, for me, for the longest time, I've thought are links, that you get in your emails or SMSs. And, I have a variety of strategies. I use programs that are sandboxes. So if you open a link, if there's anything malicious, supposedly you can't get out of that box. Thoughts on that? On links? Would you say those are high up when it comes to opening up this can of worms?
Yeah, I think it's going to be incumbent upon the person and us as personal individuals to take security upon our own measure, right? And whatever that looks like is up to you. But using a sandbox or some sort of malware or some sort of EDR, endpoint detection response, and also email protection, I think are very, very insurmountable for us to be successful in this day and age. And also, the naked eye needs to be able to identify these things. I see phishing all the time. I see whaling all the time, and it's pretty wild that the things that people are willing to do. Also, remember, threat actors, operate on three different things here: pain, fear, and pleasure. Right? They're going to cause enough pain, they're going to cause enough fear, and the pleasure is to pay them, and that's it. So if you understand those three strategies, you'll think you'll be all right.
Do you see going forward an uptick in cyber sort of events? We've had some of these big meetings like World Economic Forum, Cyber Polygon talk about an increase of these events, and I think we've been seeing an uptick in the last couple of years, as you mentioned, the U.S. infrastructure going down, banks constantly being hit. All over the place. This just seems to be an increasing trend. Even airports and airlines. Just thoughts on sort of this trajectory.
Yeah, I see. Unfortunately, a lot more cyber incidents happening. More specific in the healthcare space because it's patient first, and then the minimal investment to IT and security. Versus banking, it's a little bit more robust. What I see is a lot more security events happening in the space just to collect the data. At which point it'll be sold. So you got to remember, an incident itself, a cybersecurity incident, is a very, very, very profitable business to be in. Someone gets paid for the reconnaissance, someone gets paid for the door kick, someone gets paid for the lay of the land, and then someone gets paid for the exfiltration, and then the resell of the data. So you have 5 points that some threat actor is going to make. So going for low-hanging fruit, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in the United States, more than likely threat actors are going to win at this one.
And something you just mentioned about how our data is sold off, and something I've been worried about for the long time, wherever it is that I live, but particularly more in Mexico, where I don't even trust the bank, my ISP. I use a VPN because there could be a criminal working, at the ISP, and then they could have access to my data, and so I protect that with always on VPN. At banks, it's very well known here in Mexico. If you go to pull out a bunch of cash, there's a criminal working as a teller, and as soon as you leave the bank, some guys on motorbikes with guns are gonna come steal the money that you just took out. So just thoughts on that, and what people can do to protect themselves.
So that's a good question. So one thing I would tell people is, if you're not a military person or law enforcement, you're probably not going to get it. You probably need a little bit more education and situational awareness. But just exactly like you said, right? We saw this in Iraq and Afghanistan when I was there. Same thing in Africa and Haiti. Whenever you go to the banks, you're probably going to get robbed because there's an informant somewhere, right? Same thing as a watcher down the street. He's just doing this thing on the cell phone. That's how they clack an IED off. That's how they tell you, set you up, right? So having that situational awareness and also lowering your thresholds, like, hey, you don't need $5,000 in one day. What you need is $500, right? Just hold on to that money, right? The other thing is to lower your digital footprint. Yes, VPN is great. I would take it a step further. Look at the VPN provider that you're using and see, one, if they retain logs, and if so, are they in the United States? And if so, where are those logs going to go? Because what I've noticed is that VPN providers are storing logs and then they're shipping into the FBI or they're shipping up to a fusion center. So I personally, I like Proton Mail, right? Proton has a really good thing, and they're based in the Eastern Europe bloc, and they don't have to respect the U.S. Traffic laws in regards to logs, right? So that's what I would do personally.
And what about social media for people using social media, including businesses? I opened up a personal Instagram in the late teens, and then when COVID happened for different reasons, I just stopped posting their personal stuff on my Facebook. I don't post personal photos. I just post stuff related to this podcast. And as you mentioned on another podcast you gave, the host, I got to be out there because this is my work. But thoughts on the dangers when it comes to social media? Where's the balance when it in terms of sharing personal information, whether it's photos, videos, and other things like that?
Yeah, so I actually worked with recently a good friend of mine, Vincent Vargas. He does a lot of stuff for Border Patrol, and he's also a veteran as well, on his own companies, barbershops, and whatnot. And I talk to him, and it's like commonly all the time, dude. I got a lady calling me saying I'm reaching out to them, asking for money. He's like, I'm not doing any of that. So the more you're on social media, even myself, right? I'm on YouTube a lot, Instagram, and all these other places. You run the chances of being spoofed, and you run the chances of artificial intelligence overlay. So one of the things I'll tell you is, if Ricoh Danielson reaches out to you, hang up the phone, hang up the message, and ask them to call him right back. And then chances are this is one of the few excuses they're going to say is, "Oh, it's too loud here," or "Can we try another time?" And that's when you know you have a threat actor.
Right. I think that's a good point. Again, to reiterate, so if someone is scamming you, you want to find another vector for them to confirm
Exactly.
who they are. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just say it's Ricoh Danielson, and you guys know him in the United States. Ask him the three challenging questions. Whenever we would do hostage rescue, right, or go recover an asset, which is a human person, we wouldn't just go over there and be like, okay, I got my guy. It was, we stop for a second, secure the area, and say, okay, I'm going to ask you some questions, only things you would know. Can you answer these questions? What is the street that you grew up on? Who was your first boyfriend? And then what was your first car ever? Some questions like that. And at that point, if they can answer or symbols resemble the answer up to it, we would be like, all right, then we got our person. Same methodology applies here. You can be like, hey, Rico, tell me about the first street you lived on or whatever. And you can ask these questions. Now, I might not provide that information, but just work in the conversation, you will see if you're being, threat acted upon.
I just remembered a experience I had with this exact same situation. I think last year my father's Telegram got hacked, and he was speaking in English to me, but we converse in Croatian, and I'm tapping in Croatian, and he's responding in English, and I'm like, well, this is weird. And then I actually tried to call him, and he refused to answer, and so I could confirm that he's not typing in Croatian. He refuses to call. And I figured out that it was a hack, and I was able to log out all of the devices and return. It was some scam it was someone from Nigeria. It actually said like some country in Africa. There's Telegram is poor with security actually, and so he must have clicked on some link that took over his account. So I think that was a perfect example. No.
Yeah, it's true. Very true. And there's a reason Telegram is lax on the security, because it has to be used for threat acting for a purpose, right? And here's a bigger conspiracy thing. Like, I think certain agencies have created certain things, and they're like, hey, we're not going to touch that. We're going to see where it goes, right?
Yeah, and a lot of stuff. Well, on that note, Durov was arrested not long ago, the head of Telegram, and there has been a noticeable shift. I have seen Telegram slow down, which is kind of odd. But when it comes to using messenger apps, are there any that you like or particularly dislike?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of, depends on which country you're in, right? I'm a big fan of Signal, but Signal proved that they have insider threats because they leaked Carson, was it Carson's, whatever his name is, that news reporter. They released all his Signal chats. But I believe that's one of by far it. WhatsApp, whenever it's configured correctly, right? You have Kakao, which is in South Korea. Then you also have Japanese apps, and then you have other Hispanic apps as well that you can use as well. So there's definitely other alternative means to it. And then also there's another one, the unplugged phone. I actually have one myself. I'm beta testing it right now, and that thing is pretty slick, man. Like, you can delete the whole phone and walk away and be fine.
And on phones, since you brought it up, I used to have two black phones. I bought them early on. They were founded by Silent Circle, I think, former U.S. Navy, and I forget the guy from, was it Wozniak or one of the other guys, or the guy who created PGP, forgetting his name now. They didn't do me well because I bought the first iteration, and they had a fallout with the Spanish developer, and they ended up sort of as bricks. And I think they sort of changed. They're focused on the software now, not so much on the hardware. But thoughts on, since you mentioned phones, I've sort of fallen back on Linux as being a good solution, or a lot of people are de-Googling their phones using Graphene OS. Just thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's if you take it a step further and actually roll back a lot of their bloatware and whatnot, and take it down to the roots of it. Google is still good, Android is still good as long as you actually have a systematic approach on cybersecurity. Same with the unplugged phone, same with the Linux as well. But the problem, which Apple does a very good job, is that it makes it user friendly for updates versus a Linux or Android is like go to debugging mode, whatever the case may be. So I personally am starting to lean towards Android now. Apple just makes it easy for business use and containerization. So, it's really dependent upon the person, but I think we as people have to take the individual steps to control our access to our data. So, I mean, it starts at the phone level, you know.
Yeah, and speaking of Android, this was just yesterday. There was a news that I shared the other day saying that Google will install an app called Android System Safety Core, but it's client-side scanning, and people can go into their apps and uninstall Android System Safety Core, which I literally just did the other day. And maybe to get your thoughts on Latin America, Mexico, you mentioned cartels. That seems to be a discussion that's heating up with Trump and going after the cartels. And I'm not going to lie, the situation is getting worse in Mexico. There's people that I know who tell me their brother's on the run from narcos. Someone tried to open a business that I know, and the next day they get criminals approaching them, demanding the mafia, the pidiendo piso, no, the mafia sort of attacks. And so, at least every day 50 trailers are hijacked in Mexico. Just sort of your thoughts on this overall scenario, and then what the cartels are doing when it comes to some of the new frontiers that they're getting into.
So I have a prediction, and this might not be the best prediction, but I think you will see the first U.S. airstrike on Mexican soil on the cartels. I think you'll see that this year. I have a prediction, and usually I don't leave my predictions, but I'm pretty right. I see it coming, and because of the lay of the land of the warfare, the type of soldiers that we're about to use, and I'm like, I mean, these are tier one guys. Like, this is all they do. They hunt, breed, kill people. Like, I don't think the cartel really knows what they're up against, man. Yes, they had their reign, so it's coming. Number two, the cartel is really good at what they do, and that's robbery, theft, and burglary, right, and extortion. The problem with that, it has a life shelf, and it has the only so far people can tolerate that when it comes to a point where people revolt against that. We saw that in the Romans, we saw it in Italy, we saw that in Uganda and Africa. You're going to see that in Mexico. It's a matter of time. But the question is, will the people step up and do the thing for themselves? That's a bigger thing.
I think you're right. And I'm just stating this from an objective analysis viewpoint, not saying what my preference is, but I'm just seeing, given the rhetoric that the Washington has put out, seeing some of the signs. You mentioned airstrike. Last week I saw the news about RC-135 rivet joint surveillance jet, which flew an unprecedented mission off of Mexico. And so I thought that's kind of a shape of things to come, no?
So that surveillance, just remember this, war goes like this, and I've been in war 9 times. First, we need to study you, we need to analyze you, and we need to recon you. We need to know what we're up against. Then we start laying out the targets, and then we execute and execute and execute. And what we're really good at is the shock and awe. Like, I'm telling you, when I invaded Iraq, when I helped invade Iraq, and I invaded Afghanistan, we brought the shock and awe, and we decimated cities and levels of cities. Not really human bystanders, right? But more so like we brought the thunder, and people back down very, very quickly.
Yeah, and just further, again, evidence for this trend. Canada also recently designated Mexican cartels as terrorist organizations. So you can sort of see which way the wind is blowing. And when I first came to Mexico some 15 years ago, my home, the first place where I lived had been burglarized 3 times. There was a British journalist that I knew here who covered a story where half hour from where I used to live, they found homes with barrels of acid which were used to dissolve bodies. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that goes on. I did want to, well, maybe just one more thought on that before moving on. What you think would be a consequence of this? A lot of us have seen Sicario. I thought it was an entertaining film. Do you think this could lead to sort of like a civil war situation that could be prolonged?
Yeah, so you understand the beauty, and I say this tongue in cheek because a lot of people are not going to like this, but the beauty behind civil war puts the action behind people, not to the managing power, which is right now the government or the cartels. Right now, they're fighting it out and they're trying to control each other, but they're in bed with each other, right? It's a very weird abusive relationship they have. Um, but the great thing about civil war, we did it in for Madar Gaddafi over there in Libya. We saw in Somalia, Somalia, and then also Somaliland, and then also in South Africa as well. The bad thing about civil war is civil war. The great thing about civil war is that it pushes the people to go get what they need for themselves. Now there will come a casualty loss, and also more than likely, property loss and unfortunately human loss as well.
And in some of those instances, I haven't studied up Libya as of late, but does it? I mean, I think it still remains like a failed state in that example. No.
Yeah, so that's where people actually have to step up, just like Gaza, right? Like I was there not too long ago, and then I was also in Lebanon. Same thing is like the people have to step up and govern for themselves, and they cannot let terrorist organizations do that because these terrorist organizations are going to do what they do and just continue to failed states. They don't know how to regulate and rule themselves. The people do.
Thoughts on some of the software that's used in these spaces? We've had Pegasus, which is Israeli software for hacking phones. The first government that purchased Pegasus was the Mexican government, and there have been issues related to civil rights. The Mexican military is basically running that on us. And there's a journalist called Luis Chaparro, whose work I very much enjoy. I think a year or two ago, he reported sort of like on a second version of Pegasus called Titan, which, if I'm not mistaken, he says that the back end was developed by Israelis, but it's sold the license to the Mexican government. But because of course, because they're infiltrated by cartels, the cartels also get access to these licenses from Titan. And from what I understood, they can basically type in my name and get access to a whole host of databases that are linked to me, maybe my bank account, my Mexican whatever identity accounts, even my mobile service, and then they can, using the cell towers, find out where I am. Just thoughts on these types of, Pegasus and Titan and things like this, and maybe there's something even more advanced. I don't know.
Yes, there is something more advanced. Pegasus and Titan. Just because a government has it doesn't mean private organizations don't have it. I know two private organizations that utilize that, but they veil it under the cover of the government, right? It is out there, it is for sale, and the bad people are using it. And so that kind of goes back to the whole thing of knowing your digital footprint, right? If you can lower that digital footprint, there's a really great book called Extreme Privacy. If you ever read it, I highly recommend people read that. And that shows you how to fall off the face of the earth and have your own privacy type deal. Really great book by a guy named Michael, I believe his name was. But at the end of the day, there are going to be these types of software, these types of databases out there that just house our information. There's nothing we can do about it other than come to the rescue for ourselves.
I got a copy of the book because you mentioned it on another podcast. Michael Bazzell, that's two Z's, two L's. Also, since we're on, is there any way to sort of mitigate? I guess if your phone gets hacked, it's well, I did find a software recently that people can pay $1 for, which can scan your phone to see if you have Pegasus. I don't have the name offhand, but is there any way to protect yourself from that, or is it kind of difficult?
Yeah, so you're gonna have to get really in the weeds. Like we talked about earlier, the Android just released something that says, "Hey, if you want to remove these things, go into the debugging mode, and here's the configuration." Same with the Apple, same with your phone. This is why a lot of drug dealers, cartels, gangsters and whatnot use burner phones or sometimes even burner apps. Even burner apps are sometimes used by law enforcement and whatnot. So it's pretty interesting. That's why they go to the old school. Like if you ever booked a narcotics guy or like a drug dealer or murderer, they always have the crappy little iPhones, not even iPhones, they're just the crappy little phones and Nokia phones because the longevity in those are null and you can throw them away very, very easily.
Netanyahu recently gifted Trump a golden pager, and we all sort of saw what happened months back when, with all of those exploding pagers in Gaza. Just sort of thoughts on that, these sort of capabilities, and this sort of next generation warfare.
Yeah, so that was actually a that was actually a supply chain infiltration. I think it was magical. And to be honest with you, I have no love for terrorists myself. But what it looked like to me, and I don't have any concrete information, but to set off that type of charge, you need to lace that pager with at least a small amount of explosive. You need something, right? Because the battery just melts. And then you send the RFID's frequency or pager frequency to ignite that. So I'm pretty sure what the Israelis did is they knew about the pagers years and years ago, embedded themselves in the pager systematic supply, laced these things with explosives, and then a year later it was like, here's a code, boom.
Yeah, that seems to make the most sense. Maybe to turn a bit towards the geopolitical, thoughts. We mentioned that earlier. A lot of stuff is going on. There's talks of BRICS multipolarity. You've got the war in Ukraine, Middle East, of course, Israel, Gaza, Iran, talk of, South China Sea, Taiwan. So, it's a bit of this East versus West. And you mentioned all states, I think, are running cyber stuff against each other. Just sort of thoughts on this background context and, given your previous experience, do you see things escalating in general going forward, or do you see potential for peacemaking?
I think we'll have a season of peace here real soon, especially when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. There's a couple of different things that need to be shored up. I think a lot of the United States is getting fed up with funding that. And same thing goes for Gaza. Like a lot of the United States is getting fed up. Like, hey, this is our taxpayer dollars that could have went to over here, but they're over there. And a lot of people are getting pissed, especially business owners are getting pissed off, right? So I see a season of peace where it's like, hey, we're going to stop. Now, the United States and also the Western culture has a huge obstacle ahead of it. And I think it's going to be an attack from multiple fronts. We're already going to get attacked from China. We're already getting attacked from North Korea from a cyber perspective. We will more than likely be in another conflict, unfortunately, and also an indirect conflict. We'll probably be in two because that's what we're really good at. And then we'll probably continue that. The next administration, looking the next 4 years out, has to sustain the peace. And I don't know if that's capable or not, or sustainable.
Any thoughts? I've been thinking a lot lately of the Latin American region. That's where I am. But, Cuba, I know people going to Cuba for humanitarian purposes, and they're just saying it's like the apocalypse. No food, electricity, everything's just, it's apocalyptic. And I just feel Cuba is going to fall soon. In Venezuela, of course, Washington's always going after them. But and any sort of thoughts on some of these holdouts like Cuba?
Yeah, so Cuba, I'm a big fan of the place. It's a beautiful place. I think it has a big opportunity. I think the United States will more than likely try to make it a tourism attraction. At the same aspect, they'll try to put some sort of military installation there. Cuba is a fallen state. It always has been. And by natural attrition, when humanity dies, the dictator has nobody to dictate, right? So unfortunately, they're already starting to get there. Secondarily, I know that the Ritz-Carlton and some other big, hotels try to put something there, and they shot them down completely. Same thing in Puerto Rico. They just don't want them there. So what's going to happen is these islands are going to decimate themselves, and then that's when the United States, given that we're around for the next 200 years, will more than likely capture that as a land. And I think the United States is going to do a couple of different land grabs here real soon. I think we're going to shoot for Greenland. I think we're going to shoot for a section of Mexico. I see that coming. We're going to have our own canal besides the Panama Canal, and then more than likely get more real estate in the area, in certain areas.
I learned from a Mexican recently. I'm actually starting a Geopolitics and Empire in Spanish and Espanol pretty soon. And on the interview, he mentioned Nuevo León, the state. There's a secessionist movement there, which I had never heard of. How do you think that would fly with Mexicans? Wouldn't there be a huge up? I actually learned today from someone that I didn't even know this. Here in Mexico, people have stopped going. There's sort of a movement of not to shop at American stores like Walmarts and Starbucks and buying less Coca-Cola. And so, there is this sort of air of discontent. Any thoughts of what territory that might be and how I could see, Mexicans going a bit crazy over that? No?
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. That's good. They should, right? Because, at the end of the day, that's their right. That's their prerogative. If you don't want your Mexican dollars and pesos leaving to the United States, respectfully so, United States, we're kind of tired of giving our money away as well. So I think it's going to have to be this balancing act. But what we're going to see is, if I pray to God that Mexico and Mexicans stop drinking Coca-Cola, because this is bad for us, like real bad. We're already genetically exposed to diabetes and it needs to stop, right? So the other part is, if there is this knee-jerk reaction on the Mexican side and the American side, we're going to have an economic fusion, right? Tension here, and it's going to pull us in the opposite directions. What I believe needs to happen is, I think tariffs are a good idea if they're used correctly. Now, is it their long and sanctioned imposition of tariffs? I don't think it's a good idea, because then you're going to destroy the whole region, right? It's not sustainable. It's not going to happen, right? But if the Mexican people are like, hey, we're going to go shop local, I think it's fantastic, because that'll show us a lesson saying, hey, we need to control our own stuff. We need to have our own economic factors instead of relying upon another country.
Yeah, and in general, wherever I go, I just try to shop local in whatever country
Sure.
I'm in. So I think it's a good thing. Any further thought on the current state of the nation of the United States under Trump 2.0, foreign
Yep.
and domestic? Anything that we haven't mentioned? Just thoughts on America for the next 4 years.
I'm really excited to see the pain we're about to go through. I'm really excited because it needs to happen, right? These conversations need to happen. The accountability needs to happen. I understand Mexico is corrupt, but the United States is now, we've known about corruption. This is extreme corruption on a global scale, and it needs to stop. We need to go back to doing what we're doing best, and which is, manufacturing in the United States, helping out different countries and whatnot. But we don't need to be colluding with other countries for their benefit and geopolitical benefit. It needs to be a common good baseline and balancing act as well.
And you mentioned corruption in the U.S., or let's say the West. A couple years back, I was debanked from PayPal by the Department of Homeland Security when they rolled out the Disinformation Governance
Yeah.
Board. I'm a law-abiding U.S. citizen, and I'm just literally, just for having conversations like this, they debanked me. And governments in the West are continuously attacking our civil liberties. UK just demanded Apple, I think, hand over the back door to Apple's encryption, so then they could have full access. And there are attacks on privacy and surveillance. And one of my recent guests put it, he called this a trend of cultural totalitarianism in the West. Just any sort of thoughts on that? And are we, at least in the U.S., in the process of trying to reverse that?
Yeah, so you should have freedom of expression. You should have the ability to say something you don't want. Now, to get banned from like something like you had from a payment processing or whatever the case may be, you got to really ask yourself, like, who was in charge at that time? And then also, who did the mechanical shifting? There was a computer engineer somewhere in there doing that to you. I would love to find that person and put them on that blast. I think they need to be held accountable. And that goes across the last 4 years of what's been going on. People need to be held accountable for their actions. Now, I think the United States has a big tumultuous tide to turn, and it needs to reinforce and bring back the trust from the people and also the world, that one, you can have privacy, you can have trust, you can speak your own mind. At the same aspect, you're not going to get prosecuted or hunted down from a law enforcement organization, given that there's no harm on your statements, right?
Sort of winding down then, just we talked about the geopolitical, the cyber threats. I saw on your YouTube you talked about good cyber hygiene. So again, if you could give us some thoughts on solutions and ways for people to protect their computers, their information, their identity, and stuff like this.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, when it comes to the basic hygiene 101, ask yourself, what do you usually use? What I'm noticing, a lot of people use two things: email and a device. Okay, so we just start there. So best thing you can do is get an email protection, maybe some sort of like Proofpoint, Inky, or something like that, and then a device protection, antivirus, malware, EDR, endpoint detection response, something like that. If you can do those two things, I think you'll have a really good deal. If you want to take a step further, if you do a digital footprint mapping of like, where am I, where's my data and whatnot, and you start mitigating those little things like, hey, pull this down, take that down, that's not me, I think you have a little bit better of a chance of in the fight.
I've looked at as well as using disposable emails and accounts such as that, and people can purchase. I think data eSIMs are a new thing now. You can get
Yeah.
get second or third cheap phone numbers, which then you can use sort of as a layer, between yourself and the folks out there. Is there anything else that we haven't brought up that you think is important, either when it comes to threats or ways to mitigate them?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a new demand, right, of a personality, right, where it's going to be you're going to have two personalities here, two personas. One's going to be your regular personality, and then one's going to be like, I want to go purchase this thing over here, but I don't want anybody to know who I am, right? And that goes with online shopping and stuff like that. And I think people are slowly getting to the acclimated of, doing things in privacy, like, credit cards. You can always buy a one-stop shop, one hitter quitter, right, from a credit card. Same with the phone, same with eSIM. Huge fan of eSIM. eSIM, I think, is the next frontier of phone numbers.
Could you? I haven't looked into eSIMs, but could you just tell us a bit more about what are they offering and how they work, eSIMs?
I'll tell you right now. So right now, for cell phone bills and whatnot, I pay $300 a month, right, because I have a couple of business lines and whatnot. eSIM is like, hey, $10 for the month or $10 for the year, you get a phone number and you get this amount of data. And if you use more data, you can buy more data. If you don't want to use it, cool. When I was in Israel, I had an eSIM. When I was in Jordan, I had an eSIM, and I was like, oh, this is perfect, right? And it goes to the local environment, local network, and you can just be amongst the people and whatnot. I think that's going to be the next wave of the future.
Yeah, especially for folks jumping between countries. Well, we've covered a lot. If you want to tell us again where people can find you, the services you offer, projects, and so forth.
Yeah. If you really want to find me, you can find me on Instagram, Ricoh_Danielson. You can find me on YouTube. And then I'm pretty sure you can reach out to me on those two verticals. And a lot of the projects that I'm working on are more predominantly around cybersecurity, ransomware negotiation, threat actor negotiations, and, just overall trying to help people that can't protect themselves or the data that can't protect itself.
All right. The links are in the description. Thank you for being on the podcast, Senor Danielson.
Muchas gracias, señor.